Craig's done a number of things here. He started Google Product Search, which he insists on calling Froogle, and some of you may remember that name. And Google Maps started with Craig as well. So he's done an enormous number of things at Google. He, of course, played a managerial role here, but like the great Roman patriot Cincinnatus, who, as many of you may remember, defeated the Sabians, and the Aquins and the Volscians. He, in 16 days after declaring dictator, it took you longer to get the office going here, Craig. Next life, try to do it faster. But after 16 days as dictator in Rome, he returned to his potato farm to grow potatoes. So Craig actually has now decided to go and do innovative research activities in new areas at Google. So he's no longer in a managerial role, much like his role model, Cincinnati. I don't know if you knew this was your role model, Craig. By the way, if you can read about this is from 430 to 519 BC. And by the way, the second result was a Google book search result on this. So, because I knew what I wanted to say, but I kind of forgot the details since high school Latin. Anyway, without further ado, Craig.
Great. Thank you, Alfred. So yes, Alfred stole this thunder. This is a lie now. Now I'm this. I'm a software engineer at Google. A couple of months ago, I was a engineering director, mostly working on Google.org projects. And I talked to Stu Feldman, and he generously let me relinquish my managerial responsibilities and go back to developing some new ideas, which I'm very excited about. So I want to take you back just a little over a year ago. I don't know if any of you remember this date, but this was when there was a terrible, terrible earthquake in Port-au-Prince in Haiti. And there was immense loss of life. There was immense damage in Haiti. And there was something, I think, that caught all of our attention at Google even more than previous disasters. I think partly it was the magnitude of the disaster, but it was also this is kind of on our doorstep. You know, if you drive to JFK now, you can be in Haiti in about 4 hours. So this is really part of our hemisphere, part of our world. And you're all probably familiar with this idea of 20% time at Google. So engineers have the right to take 20% of their time and do whatever they want with it, as long as they think it will benefit the company or benefit the world in some significant way. And so a number of engineers, it was completely natural for them to drop what they were working on and work on things to help the people of Port-au-Prince. So, for example, one team, this is some photos from the ground and also from the air of the National Palace. You've probably seen these photos. Tremendous damage to that building. And it was sort of emblematic of the damage throughout Port-au-Prince. A group of people who ran our aerial imaging system had a bunch of planes already in Florida. So you may know this, but when we take satellite imagery, the highest resolution we get is about 45 centimeters per pixel. When we fly planes, we get about 15 centimeters per pixel. So about 9x in terms of two-dimensional resolution. So we had the planes fly from Florida to Port-au-Prince and just a couple of days after the earthquake and got very high-resolution images of all of Port-au-Prince. And particularly for a lot of the rescue workers who were coming from other places who didn't know the area well, A, they could find their way around better, and B, they could gauge pretty accurately how bad the damage was in each area, which roads were passable, and so on. So, for example, the Red Cross was actually able to detect how bad the damage was to individual buildings based on these images. Here's an image from before the earthquake in 2009. This is a golf course on the outskirts of town in Pétionville. This is one day after the earthquake, and you see people starting to gather and putting up tents, essentially moving out of the damaged houses. And here is 13 days after the earthquake, really a fully running tent camp. We sent people down, a group of Googlers got together and decided that they could be useful on the ground. So they flew down about a week after the earthquake, and this is a photo from that same golf course on the ground. You can just see the tents going on for miles and miles and miles. So there was the imagery group, the folks with the planes. There's also a group in Bangalore who built something called Google Map Maker. So much of the world is still unmapped in terms of having digital maps available. And MapMaker allows you as a citizen of whatever country you live in to map your own country based on your local knowledge and using, of course, satellite imagery and aerial imagery. But nothing existed for Port-au-Prince. It was still kind of experimental. We'd only launched it in a few countries. So they immediately got on it and launched this for Haiti and got volunteers from around the world, really, to map Port-au-Prince. One of the things about Haiti that you may know is that there's a huge diaspora. So there are about 8 or 9 million people in Haiti itself, and then millions of Haitians outside of Haiti. For example, there's, I think, roughly 400,000 actually in New York City alone. So many people with good internet connections were able to map this based on their local knowledge. Here, for example, is in Pakistan, just to give you an example, people mapping Lahore over a period, there's a date in the bottom right, a period of a few weeks, adding roads and adding points of interest. Here's Dalat, which I think is in Southeast Asia. I think it might be Cambodia. Somebody will correct me. People adding roads, people adding points of interest, and so on. Here is Nicosia in Cyprus. Watch the name Nicosia in the middle. It'll switch to the Greek alphabet because, of course, that's locally much more appropriate. So very quickly, we actually got these maps together for Port-au-Prince, and that, of course, was an aid for people on the ground, and especially, as I said, people coming from elsewhere to understand where things were, how to get from A to B. I want to emphasize that this is something that Google's not in alone by any means. There's been a resurgence, or I guess a surge because it's quite new, of technology people helping out with these kinds of emergencies. Crisis mappers, crisis commons. Google those if you're... I normally make a joke, whenever I say, you should Bing this and track it down. But look this up somehow on the internet. Build a search engine and use it to find crisis mappers and crisis commons. This is an open source group who are building maps in a similar way, and they did the same thing, made them available in Haiti. Another group had worked on essentially a missing person service after the Katrina disaster. And this was a fairly hacked-together system, wasn't really appropriate for repeated use, so they rebuilt this from scratch, calling it Person Finder, and launched it only a couple of days after the earthquake. So what this enabled people to do was, and again, especially useful for people outside the country who were in contact with people on the ground, saying, I don't know what the status of this person is, I'm looking for this person, and other people being able to come in and say, I've heard from this person, they're okay, or not. So in this case, we ended up tracking about 55,000 records of people affected by the earthquake in Haiti. And very quickly, we realized, of course, that this shouldn't just be in English. And so volunteers from around Google who spoke Haitian Creole translated into that language. Here's a search, for example, with, you can see a couple of records of people who've actually been in contact with somebody in particular. The translation team, I don't know if there's people from translation here, but there's a corpus, I believe, at CMU of a parallel corpus of Haitian Creole and English, which the translation team in California and the research team were able to use to very quickly build sort of an alpha version of translation. Again, for people on the ground who didn't speak Haitian Creole, which 90% of the local population speak, this went up again a couple of days after the earthquake. We also had a landing page where people interested in following the news about Haiti could see all of these things, but also donate to causes through Google Checkout, and we're able to do that without fees on credit cards and so on. And again, going back to maps, overlays on maps, things like the places where seismic events had occurred, also imagery, also the internally displaced persons camps. These things sprang up overnight and were very difficult to track. And so there are various overlays that the maps team provided to be able to visualize those. And again, many people outside of Google as well. Ushahidi is a system that was built actually by Kenyans following the riots in Kenya after one of the elections a few years ago, to basically report incidents of violence, incidents of not enough water or food, and so on and so on. And they launched that in Haiti and set up a shortcode so that Haitians could text the shortcode and say there's somebody trapped under the rubble, we need water, we need food, et cetera, et cetera. So I would characterize all of these efforts. These were not coordinated in any way. These were individual engineers and small groups of engineers and product managers getting together and saying, let's do something. What can we do? I think it was pretty chaotic because there was no coordination. I think a lot of the things that we did at that time were flawed. We thought this is what we should be doing, but it probably wasn't quite the ideal thing we could have done. And we were pretty naive. None of us had worked in crisis response before. But I think the interesting thing about this experience was that we moved very quickly. These things were up and running within a couple of days. We launched them. We didn't just sit on them and try and perfect them, but we got them out much before they were really ready for prime time, but made them public. And then we got that feedback in order to improve those ideas. So I went down to Haiti about 6 weeks after the earthquake, actually with a delegation from the State Department, with a number of tech companies trying to understand how we could help essentially with the rebuilding. I came back that night pretty exhausted, went to bed, woke up in the morning, turned on the TV, and learned that there had been a terrible earthquake in Chile. So in the intervening time between Haiti and this point, which is about 6 weeks, we noticed that there were all kinds of things that Google could do to respond to crises. And so formed a group. So we essentially formed a new project on the basis of these individual chaotic efforts. And one of the groups, a couple of people focusing on Person Finder. And so they leapt into action, got the translation into Spanish, launched it for Chile. And in this case, we had it up within a few hours after the earthquake. So we had Chile. You can see here there's about 77,000 records of people putting information in about missing people in Chile. Here are the maps again, and so on. So we had many. We could apply the same techniques to Chile as we had applied to Haiti. Fast forward a little bit to this year, about a year after the earthquake in Haiti, there was a very bad earthquake in Christchurch, New Zealand. So I'm from New Zealand originally. I got a phone call from a couple of people immediately after this happened. Christchurch had had an earthquake about 5 months before with a higher magnitude that hadn't caused any fatalities and relatively minor damage. So I kind of assumed it wasn't a big deal. But as we started seeing on the internet the news coming through, it was clear it was bad. So at this point, we had essentially a pager system. I paged everybody in the team, woke people up around the world. We had Person Finder up, this missing person service, within about an hour. We had this page up within a couple of hours with links. We're tracking about 12,000 records, smaller because the population is smaller. And again, there were people outside of Google doing the same thing. So it really feels like at this point there are a number of things that technologists like ourselves can do to mitigate the impact of these terrible disasters. More recently, of course, the even worse earthquake and tsunami in Japan. In this case, we actually had a team based in that country, based in Tokyo, a pretty large engineering team who leapt on this. We provided the framework as the crisis response team, that they essentially had the sleepless nights working on a bunch of techniques. Person Finder, again, 600,000 records. So we're tracking the vast majority of the people who were affected in a very bad way by the tsunami. But then, of course, with nuclear reactors out of commission, there were rolling blackouts. So it wasn't just the immediate disaster, but it was tracking. For example, these are rolling blackouts planned by prefectures across Japan in a completely uncoordinated way. There was no single place you could go to find out when you were going to have a blackout because of these rolling outages. And so we managed to pull that data together using something called Google Fusion Tables and map that. So that's kind of google.org. One thing I'll mention very briefly is that google.org we're able to take engineers from sort of the google.com side of the house and have them work on google.org projects. And I've just moved from google.org back to google.com. So we don't see this as kind of a silo. We see it as a particular area of application where we can take the best of Google software engineers and have them apply their skills to working on some of the hardest problems in the developing world, in crises, and so on and so on. But I think this idea of moving very quickly and essentially launching things prematurely, getting feedback and improving, doesn't apply in just google.org. Here's a completely random example. Noel Gorlick came to Google. He had worked previously at NASA, and spent a summer at Google initially. Now he's here full time. And said, this Google Maps is all very well, but there's this fantastic imagery and elevation information about Mars. So let's see if we can take that data and shoehorn it into the Google Maps and Google Earth infrastructure. So you may have played with Google Mars. If you haven't, take a look. You can also use it on Google Earth and actually zoom in on many of the panoramas, for example, that the rovers have taken. Another example of something that a single engineer did at Google, this is going back a long, long way, and you may be familiar with this, but spelling correction. We have enough data now. Noam Shazir was an engineer who studied in MIT and came to Google and realized that we had enough data that we could compute spelling corrections without resorting to a licensed dictionary, for example. And we can do better than that. We can, in this case, it's not clear how we should spell correct this query because we're not sure whether we're talking about a cup of something to drink or the Secretary General of the UN. In context, though, we can actually correct to the correct spelling, so coffee cup or Kofi Annan, because we have more than enough data to be able to do interesting things with bigrams and trigrams and more. I don't know if many of you have seen this slide about the misspellings. Who's seen this Britney Spears slide? So a bunch of you, right? We've used it for a while, and I showed it to a bunch of high school students a few months ago in New Zealand. And as I flipped to the slide, I thought, like Britney Spears to these guys, they probably know who she is, but they probably don't really care. This is a very old-fashioned. Britney Spears was a big deal back when Google was starting, and so. The last couple of days, we've revealed to you, self-driving cars and talked to you about those. We've revealed magical bookcases, all kinds of new things. I'm going to reveal here for the first time the various misspellings of Justin Bieber. You're the first to see the 21st century version of Britney Spears. So interestingly, these are I calculated with some help from the spelling team, essentially the number of these spellings per 100,000 correct spellings of Justin Bieber. So I don't know if we can learn anything from this, but for example, Britney Spears, the correct spelling is actually the most popular, which is good. There's about 488,000 per something. And the next one down is actually almost 10% of those. You'll notice, to be fair, Brittany, the second spelling is actually a correct spelling of Brittany for some other people, presumably. Now, Justin Bieber, the most popular misspelling is only about 1% of the correct spelling. So either Justin Bieber is much easier to spell, or people have got much, much better in the last 10 years at spelling. I will leave it to you.
Craig, my tweeners are saying that he's passé now.
He's over? Well, okay, but still for this crowd, I think we're still way ahead of the curve. Misspelled Gaga, right? Exactly. Yes, yeah. Yeah. I'll work on that. Stay tuned for the next faculty summit. Driftwood's easier to spell spars. I see. There's like a self-selection. Yes. Right. Yes. So talking about kind of innovation and so on. So at Google, we're obviously growing over time. We have, I don't know what the official number is, but thousands and thousands of engineers. And as the company gets bigger, sort of naturally there's a sense in which people think, well, I'm just a tiny fraction of this company. Is there a lot of point in me innovating because there are so many big things going on? And I think that's potentially the death of a company. I think we should rail against that. So one of the many things we do to encourage people to build prototypes and to come up with new ideas is beer and demos. So this is a very minor thing. I don't want to overstate this, but every Friday in the game room, which I don't know if you walked past, maybe you did walk past yesterday, I get a projector and a computer and a big countdown clock and beer. That's an important ingredient. 4:30 every Friday. And by the way, it's almost every Friday. So we cancel it maybe the weekend of July 4th and Memorial Day. But pretty much every other Friday, if you have an idea, you can count on being able to, if you can prototype it quickly enough, count on being able to show it that Friday at beer and demos. So you come along, you get 5 minutes, and everybody stands around and drinks beer and kind of critiques and encourages and so on. And I think little opportunities like that, and in particular, short-term goals, sort of low overhead, low bar short-term goals are really important. Especially to software engineers who are accustomed to working on very large systems that have to work for billions of users, super reliably, to be able to take the opportunity to build something very quickly, and as long as it's actually operating at 4:30, you can demo it. I think, actually, I should do a time check. What is the time? How long do I have? 5 minutes. Okay, I'm going to rush through this. Another example of something we did in Google.org. Okay, so quickly, another Google.org project, in fact, the first engineering project we did came out of people working in their 20% time saying, we should be able to use aggregated search data, some way to track health issues, outbreaks, and so on. And we produced something called FluTrends. But that, again, came out of individual engineers actually working on the main search engine in the 20% time, coming up with something that actually worked reasonably well. And if you haven't checked this out, take a look at FluTrends. It's essentially tracking the flu in countries around the world. Actually, this slide is way out of date. We have covered basically every country where flu is a significant issue. And incidentally, millions of people die every year from the flu. It's not just a sniffle. Okay, I'm going to skip through here. So I'm not going to claim that everything you should do kind of by Friday afternoon. Some things take longer. So years ago, I worked on a Maori translation of Google. And in order to get all the translators who were fluent in Maori to actually put this together, it actually took about 7 years. So some things do actually take a little bit longer. So some other counterexamples. A few years ago, we actually collaborated with a satellite and launch company to do this.
And we have liftoff of a Delta II rocket carrying GOI-1, the world's highest resolution commercial Earth imaging satellite.
So this took some planning, and you do have to get this right. This is probably not something you want to take a lot of chances with because it's expensive if it goes wrong. This is something we did to get even higher resolution. The 45 centimeter resolution I mentioned earlier is from this satellite. So here after it was launched, there's a few weeks where the company calibrates the sensors and so on. And so these are some images that came back from that kind of calibration phase. This is an atoll in the South Pacific. This is zooming in on the atoll, and you can basically see all the individual trees in a pretty remote place in the world. Here's the palm in Kuwait. Here are the pyramids in Egypt. And actually, during the calibration, it was about the time of Obama's inauguration. Is that right? That sounds... Timing might be slightly off, but anyway, here you can see, you can almost sort of pick out individual people. Not quite, but you can probably roughly count them. We've also got historical imagery. On the left, you can see the starting of the building of the world. And did I say Kuwait? I meant, I went... Dubai, thank you. I think we named all the countries in the Middle East, in the Arabian Peninsula there. And on the right, pretty built. Here's a very sad picture. This is before Katrina in New Orleans and after Katrina. So we can capture this imagery. We've got pretty interesting historical imagery. If you go to Google Earth, there's a little clock up the top. Click on that and scroll back pretty much anywhere in the world. But if in doubt, I think it's important to build for speed. So you may have seen this image. This is back when Google was at Stanford. This is Larry and Sergey's. Essentially, they built Google and Backrub before it by stealing computers from other research projects and hanging out at the loading docks at Stanford and grabbing them as they came in. So a pretty motley collection of equipment. In the back, you can see this brightly colored object. That's actually a disk case. What they couldn't beg or steal, Larry and Sergey paid for on their credit cards, and so they wanted to be pretty frugal, something we still try to be. So they built this out of Legos. They thought that was the cheapest way. But it turns out that there are these knockoff Legos that you can buy at Costco, which are even cheaper. So this is actually what these are. They actually found out that there are reasons you buy Lego because they snap together very tightly, whereas these things have much looser tolerances. And so every so often they would have what I guess we would call a system crash. This is, if you're familiar at all with Silicon Valley law, you'll know that in order to be successful as a company, you have to at some point be operating out of a garage. So you can see the garage doors in the background with Larry and Sergey looking a lot younger. We sort of continue that tradition in New York. You probably walked past this as well when you were going down to the bookshelf. So I came across this guy locally, actually in Chelsea, who's a Lego certified professional, a title he made up himself and then got Lego to bless. And he makes a living actually making models for developers of buildings and so on and so on. So I called him up and said, can you build us a Lego workshop? So this is essentially what $14,000 worth of Legos looks like, which was sort of what I always wanted from the age of like 6. So, and I think many of you probably share that. So, feel free to talk a Googler into escorting you down there, and you can build something interesting. This is actually a model of the building. It's a 200-to-1 scale model of the building we're in, which is actually pretty accurate. So you can actually, the windows are correct, and so on and so on. The Godzilla-like monster on the top is not somewhat more fanciful, and Empire State Building. Who can name all the people? What's the unifying principle here? Very good. So that's Al Aho, Peter Weinberger, and Brian Kernighan. Somebody decided that they would spend their evening making portraits of these guys. And of course, Larry and Sergey. And the guy who actually put the workshop together actually made this logo for us. His insight was that from a distance, Google looks really simple. But when you get close up, you realize it's actually very complicated, which I thought from a non-technical person was kind of a nice observation. So it's now Friday. My question to you is, what are you going to build by next Friday? Thanks.